double check to make sure this is working. It is working. Okay, excellent. So welcome to the first episode of Hollywood Kitchen for 2022. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought the best possible person I can think of to ring in a new year with is Carole Lombard. So I am extremely fortunate today that her biographer, who is fantastic, Robert Matzen, has agreed to join us for her Hollywood Kitchen. So Robert, thank you so much.
Hey, I'm very happy to be here. You say such nice things. How could I refuse?
Well, this book is incredible, and we are going to talk about that. But for people out there watching who might not know a lot about her, tell us kind of the 101 on Carole Lombard.
I think the best way to sum up Carole Lombard, who was an actress in Hollywood from about 1925 to 1942, is I had a conversation with my agent day before yesterday, I think. Yeah. And it's his mission in life to get the Carole Lombard story told on the screen, because he is always saying she is the most contemporary, the most relatable actress that you could possibly do a movie about, because she, for example, so there's this Lucy and Desi movie, which I have not seen, out there right now. And Carole Lombard was the mentor of Lucille Ball. You know, Lucille Ball is presented as this, because he saw it, I didn't, is presented as this, groundbreaking, intuitive, business-like woman. And that's what she learned from Carole Lombard, for crying out loud. So
Earlier.
Yes. So Carole Lombard was an actress who, at around age 18, was just starting to get her breaks in silent pictures, had just been cast in a picture with John Barrymore. He had sort of chosen her, and who knows what strings were attached to that. But be that as it may, she was involved in a car crash, and her face went through the windshield, and it almost ended her career before it began. But she persevered through that. She had groundbreaking plastic surgery and a lot of guts and commitment to come back from that and become one of Mack Sennett's bathing beauties. And from Mack Sennett, in these two reel comedies that she made, she learned comedic timing, which would serve her very well much later. Then she became a traditional leading lady at ages 20 and 21 at the Pathé Studios and then at Paramount. And she was sort of a soap opera queen for a little while. That didn't work out so well because she wasn't that good a dramatic actress at that time. But then she hit in a string of comedies, beginning with 20th Century, again with Barrymore. Then Paramount realized what they had as far as her comedic timing went. And so they cast her in Hands Across the Table, The Princess Comes Across. Then she made Nothing Sacred for Selznick. And she was the highest paid actress in Hollywood for a time. And when she died at age 33 in the plane crash, she was the wife of Clark Gable, the king of Hollywood. So, I mean, she was woven into the history of Hollywood. She was one of its shining lights and died way too young.
I agree. And we're going to talk more about her, about the crash, about her life when we talk about the book. One of the pressing questions that always pops up on this episode at the top is, did they cook at all? Because I was just telling you before we went live, I was looking into Lantern and I found a 1937 article in one of the fan magazines that was talking about Carole Lombard's balmy home life. And it mentioned that she cooks and what a great cook she was. But obviously, I don't know how on earth you could make that many movies, do that many appearances and all the stuff she did, and have time to let alone cook the food. So what do you know about that? Did she cook? Is that remotely true?
She cooked, yes. She cooked and she liked to cook, and she was a homebody. I mean, she could be a homebody. That was a side of her personality. But because she was busy, she had a cook. I know that. And I know that she had the menu at the Vine Street Brown Derby memorized, and that was where she would order, takeout. So she had catering from Brown Derby, but yes, she could also cook.
Excellent. Well, we're going to start off the show with making the recipe and talking about it before we do our deep dive into Carol. This recipe is from a really rare cookbook called Famous Recipes by Famous People, and it's had several editions. There was a 1936 one, a 1941, I believe. This is from the 1933 one, and I had a heck of a time tracking this down. So I have to shout out to the great biographer Christina Rice, who's written about Jane Russell and also Anne Dvorak. She helped me track down a source to find this book. And then also a shout out to Anna Rowland, who went to a library in Austin, Texas, and got scans of the book. So it was a team effort to acquire this recipe here. I found recipes attributed to Carol, including spinach soup, lettuce soup, fried oysters wrapped in bacon, which they called angels on horseback, and barbecue spare ribs. But after going through an analysis of all of these, I thought, the cherry tart sounds like the one to do, hands down. So when I got this recipe, as we've talked about on the show before, cooking vintage recipes is a slippery slope. Sometimes they are flawless, kind of like the 1920s recipe for Dorothy McHale's popovers. Sometimes they are a hot mess. So you just never know what you're going to get. So I did a test bake the other day. It didn't go well. And on social media, I mentioned that Carol had led me astray. But the more I think of it, it's really not Carol's fault. It's my fault. The recipe, I don't think, went into nearly enough detail for someone that's not a seasoned cook like myself. And the result kind of looked like the summer in high school where I got really bad sunburn and had a breakout on my face. So it didn't look good. Some of my friends even asked if it was pizza. So that did not work out well. I think, though, using frozen cherries was a mistake. I should have used fresh. Halving the sugar would have been good. I kind of have realized what I did wrong. But then I talked to Michelle Sebastian Price, a shout out to her, and she gave me a recipe that is similar, but has kind of a different way of making it. And this turned out far better. So do you think Carol would be okay if we pivot here and just change things up?
Hey, she was awfully down to earth. She'd be with you 100%.
I think so too. So we're going to quickly make this recipe. I hope I don't mispronounce it. It's called cherries floptis. Anyway, it's similar, but the techniques are just a little bit different. So first off, we have a 9-inch baking dish that I have greased with butter. Remarkably, I found cherries in season in Los Angeles, which I did not think would happen in January, but it did. So I'm going to line the pan with the cherries here. Okay. And then, all right, so we are going to add eggs, sugar. All right, so to make this, we need, all right, so we got the cherries. We've got 4 large eggs, 1 cup, half a cup rather, granulated sugar, 1 cup milk, 1 teaspoon or tablespoon, excuse me, of almond extract, 3/4 cup of all-purpose flour, and a half teaspoon of kosher salt. So basically, I like recipes where you just kind of pour everything into one bowl. Those work out really well for me. All right. I'm gonna pour all this into a bowl. So do you happen to know what Carol's favorite things to order at the Brown Derby were? I asked this because I have a Brown Derby cookbook from the 40s.
I could swear that at one time I stumbled across something related to that. And in fact, yeah, I did, but it's lost to antiquity and my terrible memory.
Oh,
But
that's okay. I think too, the pandemic has kind of messed with my memory because I don't have a real sense of time anymore.
yeah,
When things happen anymore, I kind of feel fuzzy about a lot of things. So,
well, as you and I were discussing offline, I wrote this 10 years ago, and I had to remind myself by going through the book today what I wrote. And so the things that made it to those pages are much clearer to me because I can look at them than the research, the great volumes of research I went through during the writing of it.
Well, one of the questions I'm gonna keep talking. We'll do our deep dive while I'm still stirring. I don't want to use the blender because it's going to make all sorts of racket around here. But what made you settle on Carole Lombard? Was this your first biography? And what made you pick her as a subject?
I had written a sort of a biobibliography, that's what it was called, a biobibliography for Greenwood Press on Carole Lombard in 1988. And it was something of a disaster for a variety of reasons. And I always wanted a do-over of that. But in the meantime, I co-wrote with my friend Mike Mazzoni a book called Errol Flynn Slept Here about Errol Flynn's Mulholland Farm, and then followed that up with the book Errol and Olivia about Errol and Olivia and their relationship on screen and off. And then when that was done and reasonably successful, John McAway, my friend of Greenbrier Picture Shows, Blogspot, is the one who put the sort of bug in my ear that the wreckage of that plane is still up on the mountain and you have to get up there and it's going to be so vivid and you are the only one that can do it. And at first I thought what I always think, which is I can't do that. I can't do that. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, I think I need to do that because this is my chance for the Carole Lombard biobibliography do-over. So that's how all of it started. And it really started with a climb of the mountain because this wasn't just going to be a biography of Carole Lombard because it's been done. Larry Swindell's book is excellent, Screwball. I'll give a plug for that. Track that down at Larry Edmunds if you can. In fact, I think it was reprinted here not too long ago. So read that one, if you want a straight bio of Carole Lombard. But this is also about the crash. And the crash is such a dramatic event. What led up to it? What happened afterward? There were rescue attempts. Men climbed the mountain to try to save whoever they could save after the crash. And that was what I chose as a starting point, was climbing the mountain, using the route they took, which is extremely perilous, as they tried to make their rescue. So I learned all about who those rescuers were, what they did, what they felt, what they found, how they reacted to it. So that's how that whole thing happened.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to pour the batter. Okay, so I mixed all the ingredients and now I'm going to pour them on top of all the cherries. And I'm going to pop this baby in the oven for the next 35 plus minutes. And now I can relax and then we'll do our deep dive here. One of the things that impressed me so much about the book was that you really bring to life not just Carole, but everybody on that plane, from the military personnel, the pilot, the co-pilot, the flight attendant. And a lot of times when there's a crash and a famous person perishes, it's all about the famous person and everybody else is, and there's X amount of other people. But the way you vividly brought every one of those people to life was truly an achievement. And this is not a conventional biography, but it's really a brilliant one in the way that you handled that.
Well, thank you. And it gives me goosebumps to hear you say it, because when I was at the crash site, I had an oh heck moment. It was dead quiet. And I wondered, is Carole Lombard's spirit here? Well, I quickly sort of felt it wasn't, but those people spoke to me right into my ear. And I realized, boy, I got a lot more work to do, because this just isn't, they want their stories told. And that's what I really felt while I was there, more than anything else. It was a vivid moment. And that's why I made sure we knew who the pilot was, the co-pilot, the air hostess, those 15 Army flyers, and the civilians that were on board, and not just Carole, but her mother, Otto Winkler, and Lois Hamilton. we learn about all of them as much as we can, bring them back to life.
And I'm so curious too about the climb itself, because the average person, like say someone like me, there's no way on earth, if I can walk across the room and not trip and fall, I'm doing real well. Like are you a seasoned mountain climber outdoors, and like how did you kind of get the necessary skill set? Because from your description in this book, that is a dangerous, ultra, ultra, ultra perilous climb to do.
It really was. I'm an avid exerciser. I run, and I lift, and those things, doing those for years and years and years prepared me for an attempt of it. But the key was having a really experienced guide, like the best guide I could possibly have had. So my wife and I both tried to go up, and we were driving to the location. It was this long drive over mountain dirt roads. And he looked at us and he said, I'm not sure you're going to be able to do it. And that, I was insulted at the time. But then Mary, my wife, made it up halfway. Then it got really hard with lots of loose footing. And it was quite the struggle. I fell several times, and he would just look at me and like, what are you doing? He would turn around and I'd be down and bloody. But I'd get back up, and we got up there, and that was the easy part. Coming back down, where you have your back going up, you have your back to the drop, but when you're coming down, you're facing a 2,000-foot drop. And that's why I would never do it again. Not that way. People kind of cheat. There's a way to go up around and sort of drop down in, and it's much shorter way. No, well, not shorter. It's all bad. Anybody who makes that climb, I hand it to you. No matter how you get to the crash site, I hand it to you.
There's not like a helicopter kind of way to make that happen, or it's just, it has to be climbed.
Yeah. Although Jim, the guide, he said, see this button? He had a button for if he had an accident or whatever, if any mishap happened, this was a helicopter call button. So, that was the safety valve. And he said that the last guy he took up, and this was 2012, but the last guy he took up, he broke some ribs. So, yeah. So it was a challenge. I'm really glad I did it, obviously, but it was a challenge.
And there's still wreckage and debris on that mountain. Next week, it'll be 80 years right now.
Yeah, I hear there's less and less all the time because, people do go up there and they do sort of raid the site and take souvenirs. And the truly sobering thing is that when I was just there for a short time, over one day, and Jim brought a bone to me and said, he found a human remain, and it was somebody's finger. And then not 2 years after he and I were there that day, they found a body. They found one of the Army flyers, a complete body, after 74 years or whatever it was at that time. They took the body out. I talked to the coroner, Felicia Borla, from the coroner's office in Clark County. They did an autopsy and they buried him with honors in Maine, I think it was Maine, somewhere in New England. So it was such a horrific crash that there are still human remains up there. And so, it's basically, it's a cemetery. It's no different than the Titanic or whatever. It's a very humbling place to go to.
And you talk in the book about what happened, how it was basically pilot error that led to this crash, right? Because the night sky was clear. There wasn't any inclement weather at that point, right?
Yeah, it was a moonless night. The Mystery of Flight 3 is the subtitle of the book, Carole Lombard and the Mystery of Flight 3. And people who know aviation will say, there's no mystery, the plane, it was pilot error. Yeah, but this was TWA's most experienced pilot, Captain Wayne Williams. And he he should have known better. He should have seen the mountain because other pilots that night saw the mountain. Why did he not see the mountain? Why was he so far off course? There are lots of, unanswered questions about that. But it's a very dangerous mountain. And I ended the book with a 2007 crash where two very experienced pilots, one of them was a NASA pilot and the other was a civil aeronautics pilot, and they crashed into basically the same mountain.
Wow.
With no explanation on a clear day. And so it just proves, that particular mountain, Mount Potosi, can just reach up and swat you down if it has a mind to.
Yeah, and I wasn't trying to simplify it by saying pilot error either, because I know that it seems like, and it's very clear in the book, when these disasters, tragedies happen, there's always a whole chain of events that kind of lead up to it. And a lot of times they're nuanced, and I think we live in a world that wants really simple, easy, pat answers to everything. And that's not the world we really live in. It's not just a simple, easy pat. There's a lot of stuff that goes wrong leading up to something going on.
Yeah, and a couple of interesting things that I stumbled across were in the FBI folder on the crash and on Carole Lombard. And one was this claim that there was sabotage. Okay, and they had to investigate that and disprove it. And it was Joseph Szigeti, of all people, who was one of this famous violinist, who was bumped off the flight in Albuquerque. Well, somebody said, you check him out. He put a bomb in his violin case and left it in the luggage compartment. So that was the one thing. And the other thing is UFOs. There were UFOs spotted in the flight lanes in the weeks leading up to the crash. And I mean, like UFOs, this is before Roswell. This is before flying saucers were even, coined as a term, and there were UFOs in the flight lane. So I don't know what that was about, but it was there and it was crazy to read. And in the revised expanded edition, which I don't think you have there, I think you have the original.
I have the first edition.
Yeah, I included that because I found some of that stuff after the first edition was out. And when it went to trade paperback, I was able to tell the story of Lieutenant Donahoe, the guy that was found in 2014, and tell other stories that really add to the depth of the experience.
And one thing that really grabbed me about the book too is how suspensefully it's written. Like going in, obviously I knew the outcome. I knew how this book was going to end. There's no question there. But reading it, I just kept thinking, oh, maybe, just maybe, this sense of maybe this won't be so, maybe this won't end this way. And then when it did, of course, which I knew what happened, I was sitting in bed just sobbing, reading the end of this book. And I was just gutted. And I just kept thinking to myself, I knew how this was going to end. And then I thought, but that doesn't mean it doesn't still hurt. That doesn't mean I don't still feel the incredible weight of the loss that day of every one of those people and their lives and what those lives meant.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you, because I sat in this very room writing this book 10 years ago thinking, is anybody going to care? Is anybody going to read this? And is anybody going to get it? Because I did write it with cliffhanger endings of chapters to keep you reading. I'll just read one more chapter. But then there's a cliffhanger there. And as I was going through the book today to sort of refamiliarize myself with it, I realized how deeply people were affected by that crash. The people who knew and loved her, Alice Marble and Margaret Talachette, and of course Gable, and what it did to change him, how it softened him, but also destroyed him, so that he was just a burned out shell for the rest of his life, basically. How he joined the Air Corps, which he had no intention of doing. He fought with Carol about that. She wanted him to enlist. I'm 41. Come on, what am I going to be able to do? I'll just be in the way. Well, he enlisted but he enlisted so that he could go up in planes and die in one like she had. You know, it's not just a story that ends with a plane crash and her burial. It's a story that just had ripple effects for decades. Madeline Field never got over, you know, the loss of her friend. Really, she became a really tragic figure and died too soon. I don't know, but I love to hear that, you know, that it was suspenseful for you.
Oh, absolutely. Because with what I do with my cemeteries, we're honoring the dead and helping their stories and their life live on. I definitely connect to that mission. Another thing that's kind of interesting and to me really sad, I don't know how Gable lived with this, was that their last face-to-face encounter was a big fight. And
Yeah,
that's just heartbreaking to think that was how that ended. That was the last time they ever saw each other, and that's what happened. And
yeah, yeah. And you know, that was one of the reasons that she wanted to get back as fast as she possibly could, was because she didn't like how they had left things. And he was ready to make it up to her because he was going to have this surprise party and he had gag gifts and his, you know, her family was going to be there. You know, it was a big deal. Their reunion was going to be a big deal, and it just didn't happen.
And a lot of people have kind of almost put the blame on Lana Turner for the whole situation, but I don't think that's totally fair to just blame Lana. I mean, I think that Carol obviously did see her as a threat. She was a decade younger. She was a huge star. She was making a romance with Gable. So, and Gable was known, of course, for being quite the womanizer. So it makes sense that Carol would have been very antsy to get back to Los Angeles. But I think just blaming all of it on Lana is kind of, I think, misguided as well.
I give her a lot of credit because I heard firsthand from a good friend of hers that she refused to take blame for it. You know, she's like, hey, I didn't make her get on that plane. I don't know. And I give her credit for that. It takes, you know, it takes guts to stand up for yourself like that. And she's right. You know, Carol made her own decisions, Clark made his, and Lana made hers. And that's life.
Well, and I think too that it kind of amazes me how sometimes our whole fate and future can hinge on these tiny decisions. Taking the plane versus taking the train, or the friend of mine who got laid off her job and then a week later 9/11 happened in the World Trade Center where she used to work. It's just kind of incredible that these small things that may not seem like the biggest deal at that time, just an average everyday decision can just change the course of everything.
Oh, and there were so many of those on Flight 3 as it made its way across the country on its last day. You know, it's chilling, truly, that, you know, a weather delay here and then Carol Lombard arguing to stay on the plane in Albuquerque may have led to her death directly because it kept the plane on the ground a little bit longer so that it took off later, so that it couldn't land in Boulder where it was supposed to. It had to divert to Vegas. The flight path was then off. I mean, anything that could go wrong that day really did go wrong, and it led to catastrophe.
And I think too that a lot of times people romanticize things. Like Gable and Lombard are probably one of the most iconic couples in Hollywood history. And I think people like to think, oh, they would have been married forever. They would have been so happy. I personally am a little skeptical as to that having played out that way had she lived. And it's always interesting to think about the what ifs. What do you think would have happened had she returned that day?
Well, good for you. Good for you thinking that, because it's realistic. And there was disenchantment by this time. And, you know, I saw things at the Herrick Library, an anonymous note written, I think, to Hedda Hopper that was like, hey, you know, Carol had seen a divorce lawyer before she left. Check that out, you know. And whether or not that's true, I do think there was discontent. You know, his womanizing was just who he was. It's who he needed to be. He needed affirmation, and a lot of it, because he was a very insecure person and actor and man. and he needed validation every day. And that just weighed on her. And it wasn't really in her nature to, I'll show you, I'll have an affair with Robert Stack. That's just not the way she would play it. I've seen hints that she did that, but I don't believe them. I just don't think that's the way she was built. And so I do think there was trouble on the horizon. I don't think they would have been married forever, because I don't think that she would have just acquiesced and, gone through the motions forever, because she was too in charge of the situation to do that.
I agree. And I think too, I wish someone would do a book on like the history of power couples in Hollywood, because I think there's such an interesting story to be told there in terms of gender dynamics, power dynamics, one being up, one being down at the, career wise. There's so much that goes into that. And then trying to have a relationship when you're both gorgeous, you're both huge stars. There's temptation at every turn. You're traveling, you're away from each other. There's so much media pressure. To me, the shock is not when it doesn't work. The shock is when it works, And
yeah, you should write that book. I'd read it.
Oh, I don't think I'm the person to do it, but I hope somebody does. But yeah, like Douglas and Mary Pickford in the silent era. It seems almost every 5 or 10 years, one of these comes along. And then of course, Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton, and there's so many of these couples. And I think sooner or later, the womanizing, the pressure, the everything just would have come to a boiling point. And there's just no way around that, I think.
It's such a narcissistic life that they lead, where you're constantly told how great you are, and people are trying to get favors from you. So they're just building you up and building you up. And so you get, I think it's fair to say you get this out of whack view of yourself. How is there room for somebody else in that couple? It takes a really down to earth person, which Carole Lombard was. Clark Gable, not so much. So, there was an imbalance between those two at least. But I agree with you in general. It's just the deck is stacked against you if it's two famous people trying to make it work long term. I
agree. And I've heard you talk about this, and I also agree with this. I think had she lived, and again, it's always tantalizing to think about the what if of things, but I think she could have gone into television like Lucille Ball did. I could see her being a gigantic star in television after the war ended and everything. She was just perfect for that medium. Absolutely. The Carole Lombard show. Absolutely. She would have been right there. She might have even taken the place of Lucy. She might have even gotten the part instead of Lucy, because she and Lucy were just so much in the same vibe. But yeah, she might have been on the Ida Lupino path of directing too. I really could see that, because she was so much interested in production and directing and producing. The sky would have been the limit for this woman as long as she lived. And who knows if she would have lived past 50, because she smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day. And, that's what cut down Gary Cooper and cut down Humphrey Bogart and to a lesser extent, Flynn. Just, the smoking just mowed them down. And also, one thing that also comes across to me in the pages of your book is how incredibly business savvy and publicity savvy that she was. Like, for example, when she is not, her dramatic roles aren't doing as well, she sort of stages these publicity things as the screwball woman, or the wacky, party hostess, and kind of spins her image in a way that propels her career forward. So I don't know that everybody would have been as savvy to that or as aware of that as she was. And she was just so charming, she could get away with it, because it was pretty heavy-handed stuff she would get into, like taking over Selznick's publicity department for a day, like she did for Nothing Sacred. Various, bits of business, you call it, that she got into. But she really was so damn charming that on her, people would just roll their eyes and go, that's Carol. And she comes across too in the photographs and in the pages of your book as such a fun person to have known, because some stars you read about and you think, great star, great actor, actress, I would not have wanted to hang out with them. But in the case of Carol, you were like, I would have killed to hang out with this woman. I would have loved to gone to an amusement park with her, or a party, or a picnic, or anything, because she could probably have gone to, I don't know, an insurance convention and found a way to have a good time. You know, she just strikes me as that kind of person.
Yeah, and I think once again, the reaction to her loss is just the void that created, because she was such a high octane personality, just affirms what you just said, you know, that, yeah, you wanted to be around this woman, and you didn't regret it ever, because she didn't have an off day. I mean, an off day, she did have like temper tantrums once in a while. It's not, you know, she was a human being, but really a quality human being.
Absolutely. That's one point I always make on the cemetery tour. I always say, you know, these people might be movie stars, bombshells, icons, sex symbols, but when you strip all of that away, they're a person. And I just admire as well, one of the other takeaways for me from your book was just her persistence. I mean, because the whole going through the windshield with your face thing, that would have absolutely destroyed a career. And I believe you said it was her mother that knew someone that was able to get her the plastic surgery that would save her face.
Yeah, her mother was pretty well connected in LA society and was able to make a call or two and get that done. What is interesting to me, having not, of course, met her, Carole Lombard, face to face, and been, you know, this close to her, was the scars that she had. This scar in her cheek was the big one, but she also had, she was missing part of an eyebrow, because she had a scar that went down through here. And she also had one, she almost lost her lip, of all things. She, you know, she was sliced across her lip, and so she had a scar there too. And none of that stopped her, you know, and it's just like that was part of her. And I always think when I see movie stars get older or whatever, and you see these, you know, lines, character lines and whatever, I love them. I don't think that they should be removing them surgically, you know, and I think that on Carole Lombard too, those were character, bits of character, marks of character, those scars she had on her face. And I think she sort of wore them proudly. Not that she didn't have, make friends with all the lighting guys on her pictures, so they would light her just right, minimize scars and make sure there weren't shadows, you know, but I don't want a shadow from that scar, so you light it head on, you know, minimize it.
Yeah, that's really brilliant. And I'm sure makeup probably had to have helped a little bit as well.
Yeah, you could redraw the eyebrow. That was the easy one.
And then the other thing that, of course, the other major overarching event, it seems, in her life was the death of her then boyfriend, crooner Russ Colombo. That situation has always seemed odd to me. It just feels so weird and so random that a bullet would ricochet and then bounce back and hit someone in the eye. Like,
Yeah.
how did you go about kind of uncovering the story behind all of that? Because it just is such a weird one.
Well, you know, you go back to the original sources from the time, and the police reports, and the eyewitness testimony, and really, we'll never know. It's Thelma Todd-like, you know, we will never know what the hell happened. We can speculate all we want. You can look at the circumstantial evidence. Jennings Lang, the guy that shot him inadvertently, went on to have a life, you know, and he didn't get in any trouble before or after. So you don't think that there was any hanky panky, any foul play involved. It was so crazy and so stupid that probably is what happened. It ricocheted. He was holding an antique pistol, and he didn't know it was loaded, and it went off, bounced off a desktop, and at low speed, you know, how grisly is that? At low speed, a musket ball goes into an eye socket, lodges in a brain, and 4 hours later or whatever, Russ Colombo is dead. And Carol was a very intuitive person, and she was at Arrowhead or someplace, and she knew, I mean, she sensed something bad had happened before she even knew something bad had happened.
That's interesting. And I think it's really kind of beautiful, the story about how she would write Russell's, was it his mother? I think
Yeah,
cards saying, oh, he's on tour in Europe right now, or they never let the mother know that her son had died. They just kind of kept up the charade that he was still here, he was just on tour.
yes, on tour in Europe, wooing the crowned heads of Europe. Yes.
That kind of says a lot about her, though, that she was willing to do that.
And that, and all of her rescue projects and all of the people she helped, William Haynes, Billy Haynes, and his career in interior decorating, and Alice Marble, the tuberculin tennis star that she rescued from the sanitarium, and Lucy, the fact that she was Lucy's mentor, and on and on. And these people, Margaret Talachette, she tried to make her an actress, but she didn't quite do that. But then Margaret Talachette, through Carol, met William Wyler and married him, and they had this long, glorious marriage. Madeline Field, the failed Senate girl, Carol made her secretary, and then she married Walter Lang, the director. I mean, it happened all the time. She was helping people who were down and out. And she was doing it quietly, not for publicity's sake. She was doing it because that's who she was.
What are your favorite Carole Lombard movies and why?
To Be or Not to Be is brilliant. Whenever it's on, I watch it. It's the one that she did not live to see released. But it was the picture that sliced and diced Hitler just beautifully, and the Nazis. And it rode that fine line where you were aware of the atrocities of the Nazis and they were poking fun at them, but they were doing it in such a brilliant way. I never get tired of watching that. So that's number one. And My Man Godfrey's great. 20th Century, I like an awful lot. Hands Across the Table's good. Nothing Sacred's good. But really, for me, it's To Be or Not to Be.
Okay. Are there any Lombard films that are a little more, excuse me, under the radar that you really enjoy? Like for me, I like Supernatural, and I know she hated making that movie. In fact, she had the famous line, "Who do I have to screw to get off this picture?" And The Halpern, I think it was Victor Halpern, was it, that directed that? He also directed a White Zombie with Bela Lugosi, which I also love. That movie is bonkers and so weird for a Lombard movie, but I kind of like it, I have to say.
I love it. It's a guilty pleasure. I would recommend anybody who hasn't seen Supernatural, you owe yourself 70 minutes or whatever. I mean, it's not a very long picture, but boy, it's vivid. And it's crazy that the possession and everything happens in it in the course of just 75 minutes. And I think she's wrong. I think it was a lot of fun, and she should have made some more horror pictures.
Yeah, I think that's one of those movies that a lot of people, it just kind of flies right under their radar. And there's some movies that have come out of classic Hollywood that you watch and you just think, how on earth did this get made? This is such a puzzle. And to me, Supernatural is kind of one of those, but it's so great. Like I definitely adore that one.
Good call, Carrie. Very good call.
But I also love her comedies too. I love like the movies that you had mentioned, My Man Godfrey, Nothing Sacred, To Be or Not to Be. Even in movies that are not super great, she still shines in them. Like she's one of those actors that if they picked up the back of a cereal box and read it, I'd still watch that. So I would still watch Carol regardless of what she was in.
Yeah, she made that a Hitchcock picture toward the end called Mr. and Mrs. Smith, that is so slight and so un-Hitchcock-like, but you get a real sense of who she was as a person at age 30 in that picture. I really think she was awfully charming in that and worked really well with Montgomery and with Jean Raymond. I thought that was a good one. And In Name Only, where she was here's Kay Francis sort of, plummeting in her career. And I swear Carol had something to do with casting Kay Francis in that. But that's another one where I think Lombard really comes off well later in her career in a dramatic role.
And again, as we talked about the what ifs, it's interesting to think of what she could have done during the war, after the war, in terms of her roles. I could even see her doing like film noir character roles before going into television. I mean, you said it best, the sky was the limit.
I never thought about that, but Carole Lombard in a noir would be. Lucy did a couple, The Dark Corner and some other ones, but yeah, I think that could have been quite the avenue for Carole Lombard after the war.
Well, let me look at Facebook and see if people are asking us some questions here.
I think it's just you and me, Carrie. I can't imagine anyone is hanging with us.
You never know. You never know. We'll find out. Well, we have 77 comments, so that's cool.
Uh-oh.
Let's see. Okay. People just saying they're enjoying watching it. Okay, well, that's cool. That's cool. I mean, this pandemic has been so rough on so many people that anything I can do to kind of just put something fun out there into the world for people to enjoy, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I agree.
So definitely. So any final thoughts on Lombard? Any final statements you'd like to say about her?
I think she remains as important today in the Me Too era as any classic actress from the golden age, because she was in charge. She held her own with the men. She demanded her rights, and she had the potential. She had the business sense and the potential to have carried on, into the modern era. Like I say, had she lived and kept her health into the 1960s, clearly, I think she would have had, she would have been a broken field runner, just doing anything she wanted with great success. So
I've always read too that she used a tremendous amount of profanity, and when she did that, it kind of was so off-putting and disarming to a lot of the male executives that they sort of would back off of being too pushy or aggressive with her.
Yeah, that's what Margaret Talachette thought. That was what she speculated, was like, she said, I realized early on that was her, her way to fight back, her way to make sure that the men took her seriously. And then it kind of became her habit, and it was off-putting to some of her women friends, and some women that she was around. This isn't ladylike, but it's who she was. It's the profane angel. That was her.
Well, if people haven't read it, I definitely would encourage everyone to get Fireball. I always recommend our friends Larry Edmonds in Hollywood. They've been there since 1937. They are a great bookstore, and they have a lot of your books autographed in the store for sale, both in person and online.
Oh, I love Jeff Mantor.
Yes.
When I launched Fireball in 2014, he was right there with copies, at the Museum of Flying in Santa Monica. And ever since then, we've been pals.
Yes, and he's a good guy. He's really keeping that place alive and well. And I hope to have you back in the future, because I would love to talk about your book about Audrey Hepburn, your book about Jimmy Stewart. There's so much more great stuff that you have done. So I definitely hope we can do this again in the future.
Well, I just want some cherry tart. I want it to turn around, and I want some.
I really wish I could just FedEx this across the country to you right now.
Yeah, and I also want to take your tour, because I'm a big fan of what you do. I follow you on Facebook. The Hollywood Forever Tour is clearly the thing to do when you're out in LA, and I'm going to do it the next time.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Robert, so much for joining me today. And thank you to everybody who's watched. Thank you to Barbara Boyd Doss for these incredible Hollywood Kitchen cooking supplies you gifted me. And Robert, again, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Carrie. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.